started to shift left. And then as things shifted left, they started to talk about agile and then eventually DevOps. And then, of course, the rest is history. And I became ingrained in looking at the world of DevOps and how to scale DevOps successfully across the organization.
Hello, everybody. Mike LeBeau with GitLab on the Acceleration team. Very excited to be sharing with you episode 1 of the Acceleration podcast. We featured Jen Thomson, Senior Research Director and Lead of Accelerated Application Delivery with International Data Corporation. Jen's been with IDC for over 19 years. She is a wealth of knowledge, and we touched on a lot of great topics, from culture inertia and how culture is the largest stumbling block that enterprises face when it comes to accelerating enterprise agility, to effectively delivering digital innovation, and how all companies need to operate more like software companies when it comes to being both a consumer and a producer of software, as well as Automation 3.0, a lot of other great stuff. So let's get into it. Enjoy the show. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your career?
Sure. So, I've been with IDC 19 years. And essentially, the last, DevOps has been around for 10 years now. And kind of my life started as looking at application services. So I was heavily into application outsourcing, application testing. And then, of course, things started to shift left. And then as things shifted left, they started to talk about agile and then eventually DevOps. And then, of course, the rest is history. And I became ingrained in looking at the world of DevOps and how to scale DevOps successfully across the organization. And it's a topic that I love, passionate about, and I'm really excited to still be part of.
Yeah, and we're excited to have you here with us today as a thought leader. It's a couple years old now, but I think very relevant still. The article you wrote, DevOps, it's an art and not a science. You had spoken with CIOs and IT executives across Europe around DevOps, its value, purpose, and use, and how to successfully drive adoption and push maturity within an organization. Would you mind speaking to that?
Yeah, sure. So this was something that we started to look at DevOps maturity. And this was we're going back a couple of years, but we started to put together our first kind of maturity map. So how organizations need to be approaching it. So kind of you start in an experimentation phase, then you need to kind of join the dots and move it to a more managed service. And then eventually you get to scale it at the optimized stage. Now, let's say 2 years ago, at the beginning of this maturity cycle, organizations started to tackle things like testing or continuous testing, and really looking at how they could take some of the, let's say, the manuality out of the processes and how they could start to join those processes up. So the software delivery lifecycle, was able to kind of that joined up pipe where you could actually start to think that, yes, I can deliver my feature adoption from the creation all the way through into production without any hitches. Of course, we're still a long way from this, and there's a lot of technology investments that need to be made. But essentially, as we were doing this, what we kind of discovered is that it's all about pulling 3 levers, and it's making sure that organizations are pulling on the 3 levers of process, people, and technology. A lot of people kind of focus on the technology angle of DevOps, and rightly so, because, it's the technology that drives this, that's at its heart. But it's really all about getting the business stakeholder involved. And to be able to get the business stakeholder involved, we need to actually start to talk the same language. So that means we start to need to think about culture. And so, of course, what we see is these kind of cross-functional teams that are spinning up that aren't just sat in the IT team, but they start to actually filter into the business so you can actually understand what your business is delivering.
That's great. No, I appreciate you touching on culture there at the end. I saw that recent IDC research shows that 40% of European organizations identify culture as the weakest link in accelerating enterprise agility.
Yeah, no, it's one of our key predictions coming into 2020. It's all about being able to create a unique corporate identity. And we actually believe that there's going to be potentially a third of organizations that are going to fail to deliver innovation because they're going to do that in a copycat fashion. So, of course, if you're going to copycat a culture, you're only taking a print of somebody's culture in time, whereas culture is really elastic. And if we put this in the context of DevOps, then what we're seeing is that in Europe, there's 80% of European organizations that we believe will adopt DevOps by 2021. So essentially a year from now. But only 10% of that 80% is going to excel in terms of accelerated performance and delivery cycles. Why? Because culture inertia is the stumbling block. So culture has to be pushed. And, we had this great conversation with Virgin. It has to be pushed from the grassroots up. So it's coming from the engineering and the IT teams. And then you're taking that, changing the culture within those teams, and then pushing this out to the rest of the organization. But this is a change management process. It takes time, it takes effort. It takes, let's say, finding the change agents within an organization, but it also requires changing the metrics and the KPIs that you're using to measure the teams within that organization.
That's super fascinating to me. Yeah. And I feel that changing the culture is probably, it's the most difficult change to make. I mean, you can select the technology solutions and put those pieces in play, but to change culture is it's not something you can buy. It's not something you can purchase. It's something that has to come, like you said, from the grassroots. Here at GitLab, I feel we're very fortunate to have a great culture, and it, as I mentioned when I reached out to you, it stems from our core values, which are credit, collaboration, results, efficiency, diversity, iteration, and transparency. And those really come through in everything that we do, but also the fact that our platform, the developer is the first class citizen. The everything with the GitLab application kind of surrounds the developer. The developer's at the forefront, making, the creating an issue, the merge request. All of these things are areas that the developer can impact and affect. And by doing so, we found that it's tremendously helped to accelerate the speed of software development, which kind of, to the earlier question, it's an art and not a science. One of the CIOs you had interviewed quoted, as a company, we must do a complete technology reinvention at speed to align with the business model. If we fail to do so, the company also fails. So I think that's really important. How can we compress cycle time? How can we accelerate that speed of software delivery? What, other than, culture, what other tools or best practices are you seeing to help accelerate that?
So it's interesting because it's all about speed, right? It's always been about speed, but nowadays it's kind of like accelerating that speed of innovation. And what we're seeing in Europe is that there is this notion that companies want to start to operate and have to start to operate more as a software company. And they need to be able to operate more as a software company because they have to essentially move from being the consumer of the software to also being the producer of the software, because essentially it's all about how we deliver digital innovation. And, to put that in perspective, this necessity to drive that speed is because the economy, in the European economy, more than 50% of that is going to be digitally driven in the next 3 years. So if you're not able to deliver to that speed, then, essentially you could actually be looking at your business going out. If I'm thinking of kind of the outside of the culture, we actually have three key themes that we're kind of seeing are going to start to play more of an importance in the world of DevOps as we move into 2020. And we actually have a blog coming out on this very shortly that people will be able to see on idc.com. The first area, which is quite interesting now that we're 10 years in, it's all around how do you actually get the process, the governance, the monitoring, and the management right around all of those DevOps processes. And, this by far stands out within Europe as a huge investment area, because to be able to kind of have DevOps become more than, or to actually become business as usual, then organizations have to kind of rethink how the products and services are funded, governed, compliant, but also kind of they need to consider the tool complexity, the organizational goals, and the sourcing models. And if we kind of think, so we've got governance and process on the one side. On the other side, then it's technology investment. So we need to start to think about the technology investments that are going to accelerate the app delivery. So we kind of see a huge focus on API management, on open source repositories, on security integration. I mean, we still haven't shifted left enough in terms of the security. So it's all about embedding the security as code. And then, of course, in parallel to this is the transition to the modern application architectures. So this is really that journey to cloud native. And I think for me, the biggest thing we're going to see in 2020 from the DevOps standpoint is almost automation 3.0, because of course we're moving from the continuous integration pipelines to the DevOps assembly lines. And so we really see this focus on how to actually drive the automation strategy, and how you can actually get to that continuous delivery with automated build and release management. Because at the moment, we're still right at the beginning of that journey.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's funny when organizations want to embrace and implement DevOps, and they're still implementing traditional application security practices that cannot keep up with today's speed of agile development. You have a waterfall security approach at the end of your DevOps software development process, and it's essentially nullifying all of those efforts that your developers are doing. So completely agree with you that automating continuous application security across the entire SDLC is crucial. Embedding that SaaS, STAS, container dependency scanning into the continuous integration. Yeah. Well, I love what I'm hearing. It almost sounds like you could work for GitLab.
Not yet.
Well, this is great. I know that we're kind of pressed on time today. Last question, because I have not read it yet. Unicorn Project. What did you think?
I liked it. So I have read it. I got my copy back in, I think it was June. So it was an early copy. And I think it really brings home the notion of, you're going to start on this new digital world, digital product, all these cool people moving into a different part of the organization. And then suddenly you kind of, bam, you run into a brick wall, because you need to think about governance. You need to think about, how do I get my hands on, the tools that I need to make builds and to release? And oh goodness, I haven't brought the security team on board. I haven't brought the infrastructure team on board. And, and then suddenly, I need to integrate into my legacy environments. And so suddenly you find, and what I think was quite humorous, was where they brought somebody from the legacy team that was actually doing this and being really successful at doing this into the digital team, to be able to help drive that success. But it was all done in secret, because if this was out in the open world, then nobody could be talking to anybody else. And that really proves we have to continue to knock the silos down, but we have to move past this finger pointing society that we live in to be able to change the culture, from this blame culture to a risk taking and kind of acceptance that we need to accept failure to be able to move forwards.
That's wonderfully said, and again speaks to the whole ethos of collaboration and how important it is, and breaking down silos. That's something we try to do with a single application across the entire SDLC, where developers, operations, security teams can all work together, collaborate with a single pane of glass, and see where each other are along the entire process. So this was great, Jen. I really appreciate your time and look forward to connecting with you in the future. Thanks for chatting with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for watching or listening if you're on SoundCloud. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have some specific topics that you would like us to cover and address, we would love to hear from you. Feel free to send us an email, acceleration@gitlab.com. Also, if you know of somebody who would make a great guest that we should feature on the show, send them our way as well. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to subscribe so that you're notified when we drop the next episode. Give us a like, a share. We appreciate your support.